anything that would be relevant to the investigation on the EJK.
My first government service was as CHR chairperson. Before that, I was a practitioner, an election law practitioner. Actually, I didn't have any background in human rights before I was appointed by the former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo as CHR chairperson. So I was an election law practitioner. So that was my area of expertise. Very limited lang po yung exposure ko ng human rights before I joined the Commission on Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that background, I guess for the purposes of our inquiry on EJK, it would be appropriate to limit the interpellation for the years 2018 up to the up to now, since she still is espousing this as her advocacy. So, Mr. Chair, maybe I just clarify, during your stint at the CHR in 2008 to 2010, this was when you started the investigation into the Davao Death Squad.
Yes, Your Honor, 2009.
2009. And what is the result of this? How do you call this? Is this an inquiry? Is this
Yes, it was actually a public inquiry. We held several public hearings right there in Davao City. In fact, one of the resource persons that we summoned, and the very first resource person that we summoned, was then Mayor Rodrigo Duterte. We also summoned some other officers, especially in the police force and barangay captains, etc. Now, I was saying earlier that yung mga nakausap kasi namin ng mga insiders, kasi at that time, hindi pa namin nakausap sila Matobato and si Las Cañas. Their names were already mentioned, but we never met them before. Nung sa Senate inquiry na lang sila lumabas. So, yung sabi ko po kanina, nahirapan nga kami nung una because we have to really hold very discreet, and mga nagtatago kami nun whenever we were interviewing these witnesses, and we have to use aliases. Of course, they gave us the names, the true names, but they said they should not be revealed, their true names. So, natapos namin yung hearings, but hindi ko na po natapos yung pinaka-report because I was already appointed as DOJ Secretary. Although, as I said, I do have with me the personal investigation notes, which I actually shared with the CHR, yung pagkakatanda ko po noon. And the CHR later came up with this resolution in June 2012. Meron din po sila mga findings doon. But yung iba po, marami po doon sa mga personal investigation notes na hindi na po nila nasama doon sa CHR resolution. I have no personal knowledge about the deliberations of the CHR and bank nung wala na po ako. Which resulted in their Senate, in their resolution issued in June of 2012. Ang alam ko po, ang natatandaan ko po sa resolution na yon of 2012 is one of their recommendations is to investigate and file administrative and criminal charges against then Mayor Rodrigo Duterte and police officers who were identified to be members of the Davao Death Squad.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, so from 2008 to 2010, your stint as a chairperson
2008.
2008 to 2010, you started the investigations. You've had a few public hearings. You were not around for the resolution. But the resolution in June 2012, there was one of the recommendations was to start an investigation. This was at the time that you were already Secretary of Justice, is this correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Did you start any investigation in relation to the filing of this resolution?
The resolution was directed also to the Ombudsman and also to investigative agencies to conduct further investigation. I gave instructions to our NBI to follow through with the findings. Although my information then was that nahihirapan din sila. They could not even trace those witnesses anymore. So, si Matobato nga po, even if he was covered under the Witness Protection Program, eventually he left dahil hindi pa naman natapos yung investigation na yung supposedly follow-through investigation din ng NBI.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, and just for the record, since 2012 and the stint was over by 2015, in a span of 3 years, I understand it would be hard to really ready a case and it would have spilled over. However, Mr. Chair, just a quick question. Yung personal notes po that you mentioned and that you submitted to the ICC, is this an official document?
It's a personal investigation notes, because it contained the facts, the information that we got from several witnesses. As I recall, shinare ko ho yun dun sa CHR team as part of the records of the investigation of the DDS. But this cannot be considered official because this was not really formally adopted, as far as I know, by the CHR and bank nung umalis na po ako.
So it was not, Mr. Chair, it was not adopted by the CHR since it's personal in nature. However, it has been accepted by the ICC. Is that correct?
Yes, I shared it. As I recall, although I cannot really say categorically kung talagang naipa-share ko yun, because I was one of those who submitted actually a communication with the ICC, the supplemental communication. I must have mentioned that there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, for the last question, for the last topic on the background, the professional government background, this is your Senate stint from 2016 to 2022, in which you held 3 public hearings on the EJK. May you know what was the status at the end of that? I understand under our rules we can take notice of proceedings in the Senate, but for the benefit of everyone here, and especially those who might not have not been part of the government at the time, may we know what was the result of that inquiry, or was it just abruptly stopped?
The Senate Committee on Justice and Human Rights, chaired by another senator, because I was no longer the chair, issued a resolution, I think, if I'm not mistaken, December of 2016. I also submitted a dissenting report, a 144-page dissenting report. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Senate resolution made a conclusion that there's no evidence that the killings then were state-sponsored, and may mga recommendations there, but not about filing of cases against Mr. Duterte, because nga yung hindi naman tinapos, there was an abrupt termination of those proceedings. As I mentioned, hindi nga pinisent lahat yung mga available CHR witnesses. So it was never pursued, and it's no longer surprising na ganun yung naging conclusion nila, na hindi daw po state-sponsored, although they made several good recommendations about, reforms in the PNP system, etc., etc.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, moving forward, of course, chronologically, this is no longer part of the government service, but we can't escape the fact that cases were filed against you po. May we just know what is the status of these cases right now? Because, of course, this would come into the... some people might ask, some people might question the credibility of your presence here as a resource person. So we'd just like to know po, how many cases were filed and what is the status of each of these?
There were 3 drug-related cases filed against me. Initially, as consummated illegal drug trading. Illegal drug trading, consummated. But later, it was amended by the prosecution into conspiracy to commit illegal drug trading. I think they realized that they could not really make out a good case for consummated illegal drug trading kasi wala nga sila yung mga real evidence, wala yung corpus delicti, walang evidence of what exactly the kind of drugs that I allegedly traded, money trail, paper trail, wala lahat yun. So they amended those cases into conspiracy to commit illegal drug trading in the hope that sufficient na yung mga magiging testimonial evidence nung mga witnesses, mostly believed drug lords or believed inmates. And all 3 cases now have been dismissed. I've been acquitted. These are definitely trumped up charges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 3 cases were already dismissed. Have any of them been dismissed by virtue of a demurrer to evidence, or it was all sought?
Yes, the 2 of them. Among the 3, the first one was the grant of the demurrer to evidence. The second one was acquittal, and the third one was grant of demurrer to evidence. Now, the The acquittal, the second case, ang alam ko po, ay inappeal pa ng Office of the Solicitor General to the Court of Appeals, which is clearly violative of the principle against double jeopardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just note po, no, given the credibility for witness, and it's very important to note that the first and third were dismissed by virtue of filed demurrer to evidence, which means that the prosecution did not have evidence to the point that the defense no longer needed to present their own. So, Mr. Chair, moving forward, just a quick question now that we're going to the meat, and I think we understand the former senator attended one of our hearings prior under the Committee on Ethics, Human Rights. However, at the time, wala pa po yung revelation ni Colonel Garma. So I think it really changes everything now that we have the revelations of Colonel Garma and the corroborative evidence that somehow the so-called Davao template was sought to be replicated in nationwide scale. We'd just like to ask, given we were lucky, you have our resource person here comes today wearing multiple hats. She was the commissioner of the CHR, which the task actually is to be a counter-check to our authorities. At the same time, she served as part of the structure of the authorities when she was Secretary of the Justice. And finally, while she was part of the Legislative and the Senate, she actually filed an inquiry on EJK. So given your extensive knowledge of this, and that you've had a background from the local up to the point, and even chronologically up to the point in time in which supposedly there was already that progression from local to national, could you please educate us? Because one thing that I think that we have to be concerned with is the so-called labeling of the war on drugs versus the EJK, extrajudicial killing. Because po, as we understand, based on the testimony of Colonel Garma, yung war on drugs po is under the auspices of authority. It is being conducted under the organization of the Philippine National Police, supposedly. Whether these elements of the PNP were working within or outside of the authority of the PNP, doesn't escape the fact that it's more aligned to the state-sponsored element. However, when we talk about the EJK, and specifically in your inquiry on the DDS, we're talking more of the vigilante killings. And I believe last time there was a presentation, I believe it was Attorney Conti. May we ask you very quickly to Attorney Conti, Mr. Chair, I understand in your presentation last time, there was a distinct point in time in which the war on drugs transitioned from vigilante killings onto state-sponsored police operations. Can you please elucidate on that once again?
Yes, according to the data, the information from media reports, in the first 3 to 6 months of the war on drugs, it started with vigilante killings, and then eventually it transitioned to police perpetrated killings. So dito na po nagsimula bandang 2017 yung talagang police operations, whether by bust, arrest warrants, or search warrants.
Thank you, Attorney Conti. Mr. Chair, so back to the former Senator de Lima. In your investigation of the so-called DTS, were you also investigating the police sponsor, or the state side aspect of the war on drugs, or was this purely on the vigilante?
It also included the police side, the PNP, the official, because of the HCIS, the Heinous Crimes Investigation Section, that was part of the official organizational structure of the DCPO, then the Davao City Police Office. So yung mga naging member, especially the original members of that Heinous Crimes Investigation Section, were actually the DDS members, as testified on or attested to by, especially by Arturo Las Cañas. So it's not just the killings by the riding in tandem, the unknown assassins, but precisely the structure which points to the fact that these are headed, especially the handlers, by policemen under the DCPO. Yan po ang pagkakatanda ko dun sa mga nakuha naming impormasyon. So already covered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the former senator has now confirmed, aside from the vigilante killings, the riding in tandem, and the Sinaloa-style killings, according to Attorney Conti, there were also police operations involved. Can you confirm for us, through the chairman, of course, the operational aspect of the police? This would include yung mga nanlaban in legitimate police operations and buy-bust operations. Was this something that was investigated in the locality of Davao during your time as CHR?
Yeah, some aspect of it, because nga of the organizational structure, because indeed policemen were handling the operations. Yung mga sinabi ko pong, excuse me, yung mga sinabi ko pong pangalan, SPO4 Sanson Benaventura as the Logistics Finance and Death Clearance Officer, SPO3 Arturo Las Cañas as overall team leader for operations and planning, sila SPO4 Bienvenido Laud as team handler, SPO3 Jim Tan as team handler. They were then, as far as I know, as far as I could recall from the records, they were then active police officers, but assigned to this HCIS, or Heinous Crimes Investigation Section, in charge of those killings.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the clarification. However, I think most respectfully, we have to clarify po, their being members of the PNP should be distinguished from the operations being undertaken by the PNP. Because while we have confirmed, based on your testimony, that they are confirmed to be active members of the uniformed personnel, but if the way that the EJK was conducted was solely limited to the vigilante side, we're talking about Sinaloa killings, abduction, riding in tandem, extrajudicial. This would be different from the state, the police operation side. Because what we've seen based on the operations, they come in two forms. You have, usually when we're talking about the HVT, the high value target, this would rely on vigilante killings that we would see and have seen based on testimony also of Colonel Garma. But we also have to consider that for the supposedly legitimate operations in which later on there is supposedly, allegedly planting of evidence, nanlaban, drug buster by bus which has gone wrong, I think this would be considered as under the auspices of a legitimate police operation. Now, my question to the former senator, to the honorable chairman, is that was this part of the so-called DDS operations in the locality? Because what I'm talking about here, what we're basing on, the testimony of Colonel Garma is talking about the nationwide scale, and we've seen it. The testimony of Attorney Conti, we're talking nationwide, we've seen both vigilante and police operations. My question now is, at least for the investigation of the DDS in Davao, did this involve, because I understand there's the HCIS and that they were active members of the police force, but did they employ buy-bust operations and nanlaban to perpetrate this so-called war on drugs?
To answer your question, Your Honor, I have to point out that the nanlaban concept actually originated in Davao and invented by the DDS. So it's not something new. There may be fewer cases then, kasi karamihan nga is the riding in tandem, mga vigilante killings as induced by then Mayor Rodrigo Duterte. But there were also specific cases na ganun, because the nanlaban concept actually originated from the DDS operations.
Thank you for that confirmation. So although it might have been a few, it's not novel. There was a nanlaban and there was supposedly legitimate police operations conducted in the locality.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair, one more question on that. Given that the transition from the local to the national, from the local it was talking about barangay to LGU level, city. Of course, it would take a lot of expanding for it to go into the national level. And we've had through the PNP yung, now we're talking about yung double barrel, Oplan double barrel. You have the Tokhang and then the high value targets. Was this something that you also saw being conducted in Davao at the time that you were conducting your investigation to the DDS? Or was this purely mostly skewed towards the vigilante side?
Okay, the Oplan Tokhang and then later the Oplan double barrel, they became more pronounced, and as they became official operations because of that PNP circular. No, I don't remember any evidence or any document or any information that there is such an official operations plan that could be similar to the Oplan Tokhang or Oplan double barrel. But, as I said earlier, meron din mga nanlaban operations. So, these are actually implemented by certain police officers in Davao. So I would not know how they call them, but I'm sure there are really such plans. Kasi nga, doon sa organizational structure, again, based on on Arturo Las Cañas' information, it's then Mayor Rodrigo Duterte who was the very head of the Davao Death Squad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the last point, given that there might be some differences, it might not have been formalized, but we see a pattern. But
Yes.
most distinctly is that you have confirmed just earlier that there was a rewards and payment scheme. And I think this is what's very important for us here in this inquiry today, given that this has basically been confirmed by Colonel Garma. Unfortunately, Mr. Chair, I still have more questions regarding the policy, operation, and organizational parallelisms between the investigation perhaps that they had on the DDS and the inquiry that we have now in the EJK. But given that we have more resource persons and more colleagues who would like to interpolate, I will now yield for that time. Thank you very much, former Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Gutierrez.